Hello listener, the Nameless Scholar here, and today we will be looking at the White Scars Legion and how in this timeline fell to the corrupting touch of Slaanesh. Though a trusted friend to War Master Horus, it was Jagatai Khan's fate to fall to the clutches of Slaanesh. The Dark Lord of Ecstasy enticed the White Scars Primarch with promises of material wealth, power, and above all else, freedom from the confines of the Imperial war machine. Their betrayal was as swift as their attacks, and equally devastating, bringing a tear to the eye of the sternest warrior. Though Jagatai himself has long since lapsed into decadent and ecstatic repose, his Khan still terrorized the Imperium with lightning strikes, each a mockery of the Emperor they used to serve. The inhabitants of Mundus planets know nothing about the past of their world, the truth hidden deep in ancient lore kept secret since the heresy. The only surviving text, the Terror of Kanjal, predates the arrival of the Imperium of Man to Mundus planets, when the people called their home Chogoris. The long verses paint a picture of soaring mountains, vast green plains, and deep turquoise seas. Cities of white stone sparkled along the coast of these oceans, their inhabitants living prosperous and comfortable lives under their leader, the Palatine. Though they had achieved little beyond basic black powder technology, these metropolises were havens of luxury and learning. Opposed to these high walls lay the Spartan land of the Empty Quarter, which stretched featureless for as far as the eye could see. Scattered across the plains were tribes of horsemen, nomads, whose savagery and lust for battle were infamous across the lands. Many of the tribesmen' own fables told of the dreaded Talskar Tribe and their Khan or leader. Though he was called many names such as Audak, Chitera, and Mafheta amongst his own, he was Jagatai, the great warrior. His legend began when Ong, the Khan of the Talskar, happened upon a small child wandering lost across the plains. Knowing that any soul alone in his world should return to the earth within a day, he was astonished to find the boy had survived the passing of the moon, believing he was a gift from the Sky Father. Ong took the youngster as his own, teaching him the arts much valued by their society. Jagatai became a master of the bow, the sword, and the horse. His tactical wisdom and foresight earned him the respect of many of his father's bondsmen, though others mocked him for preaching of a unified tribe of the plains. Sensing the power and potential of his son, Ong heeded the young Jagatai's words, approaching many tribes under the banner of peace. Initially, few gave them presence in their camps, deeming such friendships as signs of weakness and a plea for aid. Countless times the Talskar had to prove their strength in arms to be allowed to leave alive, but against the odds, and eased by the smooth tongue of Jagatai, a fledgling alliance grew of Ong and the Talskar. Unfortunately, many still refuted this new nation, and war continued to rage across the Empty Quarter. When brute force did not achieve the desired results, raiders of the Curate tribe ambushed Ong and Jagatai. Father and son fought back to back, the last two remaining souls of their hunting party. Skill and courage won the day, and two returned to their encampment, more determined in their quest. Reinvigorated, the united tribe prospered and gained strength as more Khans pledged themselves and their families to Ong's banner. Soon their lives were luxurious and comfortable, a rarity which had not been seen upon the steppes before, where food could be promised and children were allowed to play. Jagatai was held as a champion of the times, holding true to the ideals and virtues of his teachings. even as this young nation bloomed to life, fate would play heavily against it. While riding the plains one day, Jagatai came across 3 horsemen from the White Cities, attempting to ravish a young tribeswoman. Years of luxury had not dimmed the skills of the young warrior, who quickly took the heads of the 2 attackers and allowed the badly wounded third to escape. As a warning to his people, Jagatai was not to know that he had damned himself, his father and his tribe, for one of the men he had killed had been a favorite son of the Palatine. Soon an army stood on the plains, craving revenge. The Palatine was not a foolish man. He knew full well the strengths and weaknesses of his enemy. Like all great commanders, as vanguard to his army, a force of diplomats visited the tribes that made up the alliance, offering money, horses, and countless luxuries. If they refused to take to battle, the campaign of subterfuge and bribery succeeded in turning the heads of Ong's allies, leaving the Talskar to face the Palatine's armies alone. When they met on the fields of Zangui, though they had been abandoned, they fought like beasts. They were almost slaughtered to a man before they fled the battlefield. The few who were able to retreat were left to do so in peace. The broken ranks of the Palatine, unwilling to pursue further into the field of blood. Unfortunately for the tribesmen, amongst the survivors was Jagatai, a son who had lost his father, and a man who had seen his dreams shattered by weakness of others. Outraged by their treachery, Jagatai swore that the empty quarter would die by his sword, riding down upon those who had failed them. The remaining warriors of the Talskar became demons of the plains, finding pleasure in the screams of pain that surrounded them. They extended the torture of their enemies as long as possible, though it was the Palatine's nation which shed the blood of the Talskar. It was the tribesmen of the empty quarter that suffered the pain of Jagatai 1,000-fold. The legends of Jagatai Khan took form from these horrors, and taken by their rites of conquest in armor, horses, and women, the Talskar grew in strength. Not even a united force, like the one Jagatai himself had dreamt of, could withstand their fury. As the empty quarter fell under the terror of the Talskar, the Imperium finally made contact with Chogoris. The Emperor himself is said to have walked upon the soil of the planet, with the Palatine quickly offering his allegiance. Sensing one of his sons, the Emperor wandered the lands in search for one of humanity's greatest heroes. The first meeting between the Master of Mankind and Jagatai was far from pleasant. The Emperor found his son perched upon a throne in jar of luxury, the years of war funding a tent of pleasure and excess, surrounded by intricate armor, beautiful women, and sumptuous feasts. Jagatai was not a warrior hero, but a dreaded warlord drowning in his own ecstasy. The Emperor was outraged at how low one of his sons had fallen. In a bitter irony, although the Talskar's lightning emblem echoed his own, the two leaders could not be more different. This ghoul had destroyed where he could have conquered, terrorized those he could have ruled, but the Emperor was forced to embrace this child of his. So simple were the urges of Jagatai that the Emperor had little trouble convincing his son to join the Great Crusade. Simply telling him of the treasures of the shining Imperial Palace and the glory he could find amongst the stars was sufficient. With his eyes wide with greed, Jagatai eagerly pledged himself to the Emperor, becoming the great Khan of the 5th Legion of Astartes, baptizing them the white scars after the tribal markings of the Talskar. As with all things in his life, Jagatai took to commanding his legion with ease. He abandoned his homeworld to train in the heat of battle. He adapted to the bike over the horse with the skill only a son of the Emperor could. Not yet trusted to command an expedition of their own, the White Scars were instead enlisted to aid the other, more established legions, serving alongside Dorn, Guilliman, and Magnus. The White Scars became infamous for being reckless allies, abandoning their duties to charge the flanks of the enemy, chasing those who fled, and bathing in the agony of the foe. It was whilst fighting alongside the Luna Wolves that Jagatai found purpose. Horus, angered by the needless losses his legion had sustained because of Jagatai's rash actions, struck his younger brother, telling the Wild Primarch to act like a commander and not like a dog. Instead of lashing back, Jagatai embraced his brother, saying he had finally met a man he could respect. The White Scars and their Primarch were reborn. The silver tongue that Jagatai had used to first unite the tribes of his homeland now eased the desires of his men, chastising their mindless actions. After barely a year, they had become respected, and Jagatai became a trusted friend of Horus. Indeed, the Legion became popular amongst expeditions of the Great Crusade, their swift strikes timed beautifully to crush the enemy. When the Emperor decreed that Jagatai would lead his own grand campaign, 12 of his brothers, his legions, sent representatives to congratulate him, with 3 of them personally attending the great feast. Though sad to be leaving the comfort of those he held dear, Jagatai's face was alight with pride as his father bestowed the greatest honor upon him, allowing the 5th Legion to bear the lightning emblem of the Emperor, which had been refused when the Legion had been renamed. Many new worlds fell to the war machine of the White Scars. So swift were their actions that the Imperium failed in documenting them all. The battle honors for the Legion did little to represent the number of victories that the Scars claimed. From the high world of Kerate to the jungles of Okhum, it seemed wherever the 5th Legion took the battle, glory and triumph rode with them. Jagatai personally headed many of the battles himself, his personal banner standing tall at the rear of his modified jet bike, his huge shoulders thrusting his power lance deep before assaulting the enemy with his sword. Not only did his men see the honor of the great Khan, but those who he defeated would willingly serve him and the Imperium. For a second time, when his life looked fruitful and promising, Jagatai was struck down. The isolation from his brothers, who had begun to trust and love and depend upon, troubled the Primarch deeply. He had felt loneliness like this only once before, during the battle against the Palatine, without counsel from those who he respected, such as Horus and Mortarion. He took the responsibility of every death, either brother or ally, as a personal failure. He even lamented the deaths of his enemies when words had failed and force had been necessary. Constantly confined to his war room, he spent sleepless nights poring over tactical maps, viewing and receiving the wide-reaching arms of his expeditions. He became distant from the warfront, swamped instead by petitions for his presence, local governors seeking aid in petty disputes, or to honor them by accepting invitations for social gatherings. For a man born under the night stars with blood on his hands, the imprisonment of the diplomatic world was a grinding axe worse than death. Alone, with no one to turn to for conversation without sly meanings, he attempted to find tranquility in the sea of confusion that was becoming his life. He learned to appreciate the many great artifacts which had come to adorn his chambers, tributes, bribes, and gifts, each tainted by hidden meanings, underhand favors, and silent wants, though he found an old feeling of comfort and security in such items. These years were not kind to the wild Primarch. He became less the warlord and more the bureaucrat, separated from the rush of battle and the emptiness of the plains. His only connections to the front line were the few times he was able to abandon his quarters to spectate the selected battles, his Khan showing him his heroic legion. Once Jagatai had returned to his chambers, his men continued to plunder armories, reliquaries, and treasuries in search of the perfect gift for their lord. Those who brought him the most precious items were heavily favored, and soon Jagatai was surrounded by sycophants instead of leaders, minions rather than heroes. As he listened to their tales of valor, honor, and bravery, war zones were scavenged by blade and blood in the most brutal of ways to satisfy his greed. The tide of fresh victories earned by Jagatai's expedition slowed to a trickle, and the poor tactical acumen of the new Khans caused horrific losses to the 5th Legion. The items which garnered the lion's share of the Great Khan's pride were a twin pair of gauntlets named Mamonas and Avoras, which had been gifted to him by the high priest of Ikesenti. The jewel-encrusted gauges were of little use in combat, their protection compromised by the golden weaving and delicately placed precious stones. But by then, Jagatai had little need for weapons of war. Instead, his vanity took dominance. It is said that he became bound to them, unwilling to leave their presence, even going as far as to declare that only a son of the Emperor was equal to their beauty and magnificence. Jagatai had ventured far from the heart of the Imperium when the direst of messages reached him. When all those around him were turning against his father, War Master Horus contacted one of the few souls he could trust to support him. He was forced to inform his younger brother that Primarch Dorn had turned his back upon the Emperor, and he was not alone. With echoes of the fields of Zangui against the Palatine reverberating in his heart, Jagatai flew into a violent rage, swearing that he would personally destroy all those who had failed mankind. Halting his expedition and recalling all of his forces to his banner, the fleet prepared for warp jump, destined for Terra, intending to stop only at Chogoris to recuperate their losses, retreating to his chambers to reclaim his calm. Jagatai lost himself among his precious gifts, the intricate armor placed from Kasa, the handcrafted sword which had cost the lives of 3 Arsalani Forge Masters, and finally, Mamonas and Avoras, which whispered sweet words of comfort into the Primarch's heart. Even when the fleet's warp engines inexplicably failed, he would not be distracted from his obsession. The warp has neither night nor day, just a constant stretch of time without respite. When Jagatai emerged from his quarters, his crew and his men had lost all morale, believing themselves abandoned in the warp, and their commander distraught from his brother's treachery. Though his eyes looked sore from lack of sleep, they glistened with an energy which only emphasized the grin which spread across his face. Unknown to all bar Jagatai himself, he had found a savior from the troubles that racked his mind. Walking amongst his blood brothers, He called them all by name and judged their skill with a sword, their worth as a comrade, and their eagerness to follow his lead. With his renewed vigor, he personally fixed the warp engines, laboring for many hours alone in the dark confines, with only his gauntlets for company. When the fleet finally broke out into real space, at Chogoris, Jagatai had organized a patchwork force of all the brotherhoods, stating that if the White Scars were to fail, then all would be represented in the rebirth of the Legion, as this detachment secured the fortress monastery upon Chogoris and prepared the citizens for war against the fallen Imperium. The Great Khan left them with chilling orders: isolate yourself from the outside, be the viper in the pit, hidden but ready to strike. By me or the Emperor himself, trust no one. The arrival of the White Scars on Terra was meant to be a beacon of hope to the Loyalist cause, reinforcements to aid the war against the traitorous Dorn. Unfortunately, all communications with the Legion were lost in static, with only the crazed mumblings and screams of the damned breaking the interference. Jagatai Khan had lost none of his tactical mastery over the years, leading his host of Thunderhawks directly for the Lionsgate spaceport, mindful of the massacre perpetrated by the Blood Angels at the Eternity Wall spaceport, and unable to receive any coherent reply to his hails. The spaceport's commanding officer ordered that the Lionsgate's anti-air defenses and heavy shields remain active. Only through the direct intervention of War Master Horus himself were these systems finally deactivated and the White Scars given permission to land. This proved to be a grave error of judgment. The details of the slaughter which followed were overshadowed by later actions across the globe, and the ground of Terra shook under the bikes of White Scars dedicated to Slaanesh. At first, Horus refused to believe the reports which reached his command post, but once Jagatai had accepted the bounty of the Imperial Palace from Dorn, a prize which the Great Khan saw as rightly his after the promises of his father, and began massacring the citizens of Terra, the War Master was forced to accept that in these darkest of days, even one of his closest friends could betray him. Painting a single tear drop in the corner of the eye of Horus, which emblazed his chest, he stood amongst his sons as they accepted the charge of the White Scars. The initial assault devastated the Loyalist line, but to universal surprise, the second attack never materialized. Having proved their worth on the battlefield against their Astartes brothers, and with the riches of the Imperial treasury now secured in their ships' hulls, the White Scars capriciously returned to the spaceport, ignoring the bitter threats from Dorn and other traitor primarchs, and seemingly indifferent to the fate of the heresy that hung so precariously in the balance. The Fifth Legion left Terra in search for further plunder. Whilst the victorious Loyalists still wept at the death of the Emperor, the White Scars slaughtered world after world and ransacked their riches. Relic worlds, shrine worlds, and forge worlds all suffered the lightning strikes of the White Scars, with countless treasures lost to the greed of Jagatai before he finally retreated into the Eye of Terror. Jagatai never set foot upon Chogoris again, seemingly forgetting his childhood home. The fate of the planet is, however, detailed extensively in the chronicles of Abaddon's crusades. After stabilizing what remained of the Imperium, the first High Lord turned his gaze to the homeworlds of the traitor legions. A combined force of Death Guard and Black Templars, under the dead eyes of Mortarion, was given the honor of reclaiming Chogoris. the Patchwork Brotherhood, abandoned by Jagatai, fought like wolves alongside the endless ties of tribal horsemen and Palatine infantry, still heeding the words of the great Khan. None dared to question the righteousness of their cause. Their hearts were full of sorrow, for the coming of the enemy meant that Jagatai, and indeed the Emperor, had failed, and that they were the last warriors of his memory. There would be only one result to this war, a triumphant Imperium. The tragedy of this conflict would only come to light when the few surviving White Scars were interrogated for the location of their Primarch. The defenders believed themselves the final guardians of the Emperor's dream. The invading force, to them, were the traitors. As the truth was told, many refused to accept that their Primarch could have discarded them. Others wept as it struck chords within them, their souls telling them all they needed to know. Those left behind were the ones Jagatai had been unable to taint, those too noble and pure of spirit. For their virtues they had led their people into a massacre. A remembrancer of Abaddon's fleet penned the words for this most harrowing of events. Chogoris burned to ashes, bloodied by war. Though enemies, though foes, only loyal sons of the Emperor died that day. In the first few millennia after the Great Betrayal, a demon centaur claiming to be Jagatai led invasions into the Imperium, striking without warning and seemingly without logic. During this time, the beast commanded the Legion to such horrors as the Red Highway Massacre, a feat which, even with their bitter hatred of one another, the coordinate space wolves respect as an act of bloodshed almost without comparison. As the centuries wore on, Jagatai became increasingly distracted from his conquests, instead depending upon his Khans to fight in his name. Whilst he lived in ecstasy, surrounded by treasures and pleasures, it had been many millennia since the demon Primarch of Slaanesh has personally made war upon the Imperium, and many scholars doubt he truly still commands the Legion. Addendum: the Red Highway Massacre. Of all the sadistic acts in the history of the White Scars, the slaughter of the refugees of Urgench is by far the bloodiest. After days of constant attacks, which culminated with the critical destabilization of the city's reactor core, Jagatai retreated to his Gur to watch the Hive City cripple itself with fear. Instead, the valiant imperial governor led his people on a desperate march to the neighboring hive of Merv. The onslaught of the White Scars was swift, their bikes allowing them to easily catch the massive train of civilians. Over a period of 6 days and nights, the population of Urgench was besieged by the murderous hordes of Jagatai Khan. Not a single soul made it to the gates of Merv. Mundus Planus, or Chogoris as it was once known, was a planet of two worlds when Jagatai rode across its soils. The cities that had belonged to the Palatine were built from white rock, a shining beacon of humanity's glory from horizon to horizon. The ivory walls secured a life of peace and prosperity from its inhabitants. Both landscape and lifestyle stood in contrast to that of the empty quarter. As grasslands stretched into grasslands, it seemed impossible for any single man to claim it as his own. Hills rolled into mountains, of which the elixir of life trickled into the mighty rivers which fed the land. Upon these nomads, a strict life was forced. Food was scarce, war was frequent, and many died young. Master of the horse, the bow and the sword, it was these people who raised Jagatai as their own, and it was they who formed the ranks of the White Scars. All the bloodshed in its history paled in comparison to the fate of the world. Abandoned and deceived by Jagatai, a small force of loyal White Scars stood alongside both tribesmen and warriors of the Palatine against Abaddon's crusade. Not only was every inhabitant slaughtered in the foolish war, the culture and legacy of the world was also obliterated. In the centuries to come, the planet was transformed into the Mundus Planus of today. The cities of marble were replaced by endless factories, pumping smoke and pollutants into the air, whilst the empty quarter became host to towering hives that would make the nomads turn in their graves. Though spared the horror of exterminatus, Mundus Planus was instead sentenced to become but a simple, anonymous cog in the imperial machine. For century after century, it has quietly and unremarkably produced its worth in goods and regiments, oblivious to the horrors of its dark past. Of the White Scars themselves, they settled upon the demon world of Caprax, located deep within the Eye of Terror. The vast plains of their home world were recreated to the whims of Jagatai, the very earth given form by the desire of their Primarch, allowing his men to roam free, doing as their urges decreed. The planet became home to excess, greed and indulgence. Those with enough blood money and power erect gers filled with exotic luxuries, which aped the great pleasure dome of Jagatai himself. It is unknown how many brothers of the White Scars, like their Primarch, have not left Caprax since its creation, spending all eternity there without ever growing bored. Recruitment into the White Scars is a torment for even the sternest of soldiers, and few enter the path willingly. The ancient rituals which once produced warriors loyal to the Emperor have become twisted like their masters into ceremonies of pain. The magics of chaos allow the host to overcome by the power of Jagatai's gene seed. The Storm Seers, masters of the winds of Slaanesh, bind the genes of the great Khan to the captive, whilst apothecaries cut out the ritual scarring. The transformation takes many weeks, although to the recruit it seems to be an eternity of agony. During this time, the Storm Seers never cease in their trance-like chants, delivering new souls to the Dark Lord. Many weaklings fail their physical forms, too frail for the power of Jagatai. The ideologies and practices of the White Scars have traveled a dark path. Much like the Legion itself, the teachings of the Storm Seers, both skilled in the art of magics and the ways of Slaanesh, are structured around two core pillars by which all brothers live and die. These central beliefs are that one must attain all that is possible and live to their body's fullest capabilities. If an imperial preacher taught these words to his flock, they would be virtues of life, creeds that would surely send a soul to the table of the Emperor. But the twisted minds of the White Scars have belittled these tenets into nothing more than greed and ecstasy. They want for all that is not theirs, but once they have acquired it, it pales and fails to satisfy their lust. They take their bodies to the highest of pleasures and deepest of pains, all in the name of their patron, Slaanesh. Though all White Scars still remain loyal to the Great Khan, it has been long millennia since he left his palace of pleasure to lead the Legion. Instead, groups have formed around inspiring Khans who command by strength of arms, fear, and above all else, the promise of wealth. These brotherhoods range from a small band of like-minded individuals to forces equaling that of several loyalist grand companies in number. Of all the brotherhoods of the White Scars, the triumvirate of the Rampagers, Destroyers, and Marauders constantly vie to be the most brutal and feared. Each brotherhood is structured around the disposition and resources of their kind, making each one individual and unique. A few commonalities have survived the fall of the Legion, such as the absence of Havoc Squads and the distaste towards dreadnoughts, whilst the first is simply antagonistic to the flowing style of warfare taught by Jagatai. The latter strikes a fear into the hearts of the fearless. Entombment within the sarcophagus of these beasts is seen as greatest of torments for them. The cold metal, devoid of the sense of pleasure. It has been known for Khans to punish those under their command by imprisoning them inside the dreadnoughts when such behemoths can be captured from loyalist forces. These poor souls quickly fall to insanity and are launched into the heat of battle, resulting in much consternation through the enemy's ranks. The preference for mobile warfare within the Legion still echoes from the tribesmen of Chogoris, with the use of bike squads being heavily favored. These brothers will often group in sixes, the sacred number of Slaanesh, and those who embrace it are smiled upon by their Dark Lord. The White Scars are the only traitor legion able to field land speeders through their numbers, are limited by the legion's inability to produce the vehicle, instead depending on pillaging them from the battlefield. A Khan who manages to acquire such treasures will find his status and power much advanced. Though there is no true ranking of the splinter factions, bar that Jagatai is lord of all, there are positions of great power within the Legion, and Astartes, known only as the voice of the great Khan, speaks in the name of Jagatai, and effectively rules all, is a foolish Khan who refuses to follow the orders of the voice, for the wrath he can bring is almost equal to that of the Primarch. The Stormseers are also a dominant force within the Legion, their expertise in the magics of Slaanesh granting them power beyond the dreams of others. They extract a high price in treasure and slaves for their services on and off the battlefield, but it is one the Khans must pay for the continued existence of their brotherhoods. The Lord of the Hunt is a much feared brother of the White Scars, owing no allegiance to any force. He roams the galaxy in search of his prey. A few marines, drunk on the thrill of the hunt, follow the stalker on his missions, though none survive long. The imperial records on the Lord of the Hunt are confused at best. Whether it is a single man who has survived since the heresy, or if as one dies, another takes up the title, is mere postulation by scholars. The legend states that a Khan walked the fields at the siege of Terra, challenging loyalist and chaos champions alike to single combats. The number which fell to his blade is unknown, but since that day, the coming of the Lord of the Hunt is a harbinger of death for his prey. Since their fall to the Dark Prince of Excess, the White Scars have only furthered their mastery of mobile warfare. Their assaults are reminiscent of those of the Talskar as they bled the empty quarter dry, appearing from all sides. The only warning is the thunder of vengeance as bikes appear on the horizon. Strikes come hard and fast, only for an eerie silence to settle as the White Scars retreat, though victory could have been easily achieved. Such tactics are deemed foolish by many strategists, as they allow an unprepared foe time to dig in, but such is the brutality of the first blow, that the enemy is demoralized and terror begins to spread its insidious roots. The White Scars, watching glee as the enemy force tears itself apart from within, unable to cope with the fear of a second attack that might come at any moment. Wherever the sons of Jagatai tread, destruction follows. Their ability to isolate the weak link in any defensive force wreaks havoc across the line. A once secure flank finds itself surrounded by the enemy, whilst the foe, thinking itself under attack, awakes to see no enemy, but can hear the screams of men in defensive lines behind them. There have been occasions when the nobility of humanity has prevailed, and instead of falling apart, a strengthened united community stands against the White Scars. Such insults are treated harshly, and the brave fools sometimes find themselves suffering a fate worse than death, forced induction into the legion against which they fought so bravely. Such is the decoration and wealth of the armor and weapons which adorns each marine, that many have confused brothers of the White Scars as leaders. Blades worthy of loyalist captains are found in the hands of mere warriors. It is said that a victory over the Legion, if it can be achieved, is a lucrative one. Indeed, for the riches earned from pillaging the bodies of the Astartes could build a city. Even while serving the Emperor during the Great Crusade, the purity of the White Scars gene seed was thrown into doubt. The genetics of the tribesmen of Chogoris proved as resolute and strong as the people themselves, entwining itself with the gene seed of Jagatai. Their lust for war and savagery became one with the brutality of the Space Marine to produce a dark stain in humanity's history. Even without the recruits of their homeworld, the White Scars have become increasingly sadistic and barbaric in their nature. Even their most hated ally, the Coordinate Space Wolves, have been known to call the White Scars cruel. Mutations have become rife in the number of the Brotherhoods, whilst others have managed to maintain some genetic integrity. The Marauders are renowned for their demonic forms. Many of their Marines have taken, their horror almost rivaling that of the myriad creatures of the warp. The magics which are used to create new recruits for the Legion only further stifle the purity of Jagatai's legacy. The poison of chaos flowing early into what was once a holy ritual. Even as a Marine is born into the foul life of the White Scars, he is obsessed with want and destroyed by pleasure, a true child of Slaanesh. And as for their battle cry, although many different calls are used by the White Scars, for the Khan remains a constant across the Brotherhoods. When the Dark Prince wants something, he will not stop until he gets it.